In this lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about one object that you're also going to listen to a lecture at smarthistory.org, which I've got linked in Blackboard this week. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about this so-called royal lyre, or the lyre that when I learned about it, was called the lyre of Queen Puabi. Puabi is one of the supposed or assumed to be royals who were buried in this royal tomb complex at the city of Ur, very close to the ziggurat that we were looking at in the last lecture. And we assumed that this must have been a royal family, partly because their graves were just chock full. The ones that hadn't been looted were just chock full of incredibly expensive stuff. And in the case of the lyre, it was actually buried in a pit with about, let's see, 74 bodies of people who were interred with the royal person who died. And here, it's just a map, just reminding you we're still talking about Mesopotamia, and we're still talking about what's essentially modern-day Iraq. And then here is the city of Ur in the very southern part of of what's now Iraq, close, not exactly on the Persian Gulf, but close to the Persian Gulf. So still from this Fertile Crescent, and still technically Sumerian civilization. We're still talking at about 2700 BCE at this point. And again, I'm not going to worry so much for the exam whether you can say it's Sumerian or Babylonian. Just ancient Near Eastern is fine. But I mean, just technically, we are talking about a Sumerian burial in a Sumerian city right by the temple and ziggurat complex that we were looking at last time. Here, by the way, is a sketch of the pit that the lyre was actually found in, and you can see, if you look sort of in the bottom left quadrant of this drawing, which was actually made by Leonard Woolley, who was the archaeologist responsible for digging up this site, there is a drawing that shows you the lyre that we'll be looking at. And lyre, L-Y-R-E, is a kind of harp. I don't mean liar, liar, pants on fire, right? L-Y-R-E, lyre. So this is a sketch showing the burial pit that has a lot of grave goods. Things that are buried with a person to go on to the next world are called grave goods, because they're specifically created for the purpose of interring them with a deceased person. And you can see in this case you also have a large number of attendants, 74 people, 68 of them women, who were buried with the woman who was assumed to be the royal person buried in this tomb. The idea here being, and this is something that's actually not uncommon in ancient civilizations, that a person would need attendants after their death. And so oftentimes what you'll find is sculptures that are representations of people that are attending the deceased off in the next world. But in some cases, like in this city of Ur, the theocracy and the theology requires that people who had served the person in life would continue to serve that person in death. Now, this is a far cry from, say, Neolithic society, in which the deceased person would be buried underneath the floors of the bedroom so that they could be kept spiritually with the living, right? This is kind of taking it to the opposite extreme. And so we can see from the amount of stuff and the expensive stuff of grave goods that are buried in this royal tomb, and the fact that you've got so many living people who are basically executed so they can go into the next world with the deceased royal person, the incredible hierarchy of this civilization, the incredible wealth of the royal people who are buried here, and the power of those people. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And I'd say a good portion of the artifacts that we look at in this course are things that, especially in this first half of the course, are really grave goods, stuff that is intended to be buried with somebody, and typically buried with somebody who's at the very top of society. And we end up then having a better idea of what royal people were like, what kind of material goods they had, what kind of power they had, and what they believed in, much more so than we ever have information for your average run-of-the-mill peasant. And that's just sort of the nature of art history in this period. Okay, so the object that I want you to see, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit of that background because they don't really talk about that in the lecture I'm having you watch at smarthistory.org. This is the lyre of Queen Puabi, which was found all smashed up with the wood almost rotted away when the excavation happened in the 1920s. So the wood body of this object is really a reconstruction based on guesstimates that are partly based on actual images of lyres that we have found in the same context. So the lecture at Smart History will talk to you more about the lyre and its symbolism and things like that, but I also wanted to make sure you knew exactly where it came from. It's a grave good dug out of the ground of somebody who's a royal person in the city of Ur. There, by the way, is Leonard Woolley with one of the lyres, as you can see, in very damaged, bad condition. This is not that there were two in that grave, and so this is the other one that was a little bit more intact, but just to give you a sense of, you know, what it looked like when it came out of the ground. And that's probably 1927, something like that, that photograph. And, a couple of terms that I wanted to make sure that you have a handle on when you listen to that. It's a really good lecture, the Smart History lecture. I just want to make sure to point out a couple of things. Here you've got animals doing human things, which like sacrificing, right, and playing music. So just make sure you know that the technical name for animals behaving like humans is anthropomorphism. I'd like to make sure you know that animal symbolism, when you use animals in a symbolic way, like the bull on the lyre, the bull's head on the lyre, and we've seen this before, right? We've seen the bull motif now several times. That is called animal symbolism. When you represent a bull or an animal, and that it's meant to connote the sort of special powers or special attributes or characteristics of that animal, and then to take them beyond. I mean, the bull becomes a symbol of divinity. It becomes a symbol of royalty because it's powerful, because it's virile, because it's very masculine, and so that's sort of why you see it in a religious and royal context. And so animal symbolism is the term for that. Registers are simply the bands on which the narrative is happening. You can see this is like a comic strip. This is divided into 4 registers. And heraldic motif is flanking animals that are sort of mirror images of each other, like the two human-headed bulls and the top register of this image. And that's all I'm going to say for now on that. Okay, oh yes, and then one other term, the composite animal, the human-headed scorpion that they talk about in the lecture at smarthistory.org is an example of a composite animal. The human-headed bull, any animal that is created out of 2 or more different animals is a composite animal, and that often has some sort of symbolism, you know, some sort of trying to harness the power of a couple of different types of animal. So that's something that you'll see fairly often in the ancient world. And one of the possible interpretations of what's going on here is that it may represent stories of Gilgamesh and Gilgamesh going to the underworld. I mentioned this before. Remember the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's the first recorded epic novel isn't quite the right word, but the first recorded epic story that we have in the West. And it is a story that has elements that kind of jibe with elements of the Genesis narrative that talks about the Great Flood and things like that. So it's an early example of the sort of, you know, shared narrative of human history that's developing with written language in the West. And then finally, I just wanted to show you a couple of other things that were buried in that royal tomb. On the left, you can see some very elaborate headdresses and earrings made of hammered gold, just to give you a sense of the wealth that is represented in this tomb. And then on the right, you have some ceremonial instruments and cups and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into a grave for a person to go off into the next world. You know, you need your everyday objects like drinking cups and things like that. You need music, you need attendance in this cosmos, right? And you need jewelry to be beautiful, to be sort of decorated for the next world. And so just to give you a sense of the wealth of what was found in this royal tomb at Ur, some of which now belongs to the University of Pennsylvania, which sponsored these excavations. Leonard Woolley worked for them when he was excavating a lot of ore, and some of it is in Iraq, or was in Iraq until the museum was looted in 2003, and some is in other places like in Germany.